The sun burned high above Dry Creek, its heat pressing down on the land until even the air seemed to shimmer. Eli Rollins squinted against the glare as his horse carried him along the dusty trail. The animal's hooves struck the dry earth, kicking up red dust that clung to his worn chaps, his faded shirt, and the sweat on his skin. He had been riding since dawn from his ranch 40 miles north. All this distance for a few sacks of barley. The drought had bitten harder this year than most, and his horses needed feed if they were to last the season. Town was the last place Eli wanted to be, but necessity had made the decision for him. Dry Creek appeared at last, rising from the desert like a row of tired bones. The false-fronted buildings leaned under the weight of the sun, their paint peeling, their signs faded. A few horses stood tied to hitching posts with heads hung low. The air stank of dust, sweat, and sour whiskey drifting out from the saloon. Eli swung down in front of Morrison's general store, tied his horse, and patted its hot neck. "Won't be long, boy," he muttered. Inside, the air was cooler, but heavy. Wooden shelves sagged under bolts of cloth, jars of beans, boxes of ammunition, and tools. Chester Morrison, the storekeeper, was talking to two ranchers by the counter. "I told her last week, no more credit," Morrison said loudly, puffing up with self-importance. "A woman's got to learn to manage better. That Miriam Harper's always been trouble. Tom Garrett sneered trouble before her husband died, and worse after," another added. Eli stepped forward, keeping his voice steady after noon. "I'll take 3 sacks of barley," Morrison looked up, his grin turning into a merchant's smile. "Eli Rollins. Haven't seen you in town for months. That'll be $12. Eli laid down the bills, but before Morrison could count them, the bell above the door rang. Conversation fell silent. A woman stepped inside, and the air itself seemed to grow heavy. She was younger than Eli expected, perhaps 25. Her dark hair was pulled back in a plain knot. She wore a faded calico dress mended more than once, but her back was straight and her chin lifted with a dignity that dared the room to break her, "Mr. Morrison." She said softly, "I need flour, salt, and a tin of lard." Morrison's face hardened. "Cash up front, Mrs. Harper." "You know that." She opened her small purse and placed coins on the counter. Eli could see from where he stood that it wasn't enough. Morrison counted them slowly, dragging out her shame. "This will cover half the flour," he said, voice thick with satisfaction. "No salt, no lard." "Then I'll take what it covers," she answered, though her hands trembled. Tom Garrett smirked. "Maybe you should consider other ways of earning money. Widow's got to make her way somehow." Eli watched as Miriam Harper turned on him, fire flashing in her dark eyes. "I manage honestly, Mr. Garrett, which is more than some can say." "Honest women don't poison their husbands," the other man muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The words fell like a stone. Miriam's face paled, but she held her ground. "My flour, Mr. Morrison." Morrison leaned forward, cruelty curling in his smile. "Prices have gone up. Those coins might buy you a cup of flour." If that Eli's jaw tightened. He stepped forward and laid 2 silver dollars on the counter beside her coins. "Add what the lady needs to my order." The room froze. Miriam turned to him, pride warring with desperation in her eyes. Up close, Eli noticed the hollows in her cheeks, the neat patches in her dress, the worn leather of her boots. "I can't accept," she whispered. "You're not accepting," Eli said calmly, keeping his eyes on Morrison's store. "Made an error in my favor last time I was here. This squares us. Isn't that right, Morrison?" The storekeeper flushed but nodded, unwilling to challenge Eli's steady gaze. Miriam's voice shook, but she held it steady. "Flour, salt, lard, and a small bag of sugar, if it's not too much. For my daughter, whatever she needs," Eli said. He turned away, giving her the dignity of not watching as Morrison filled her order. The room stayed silent, but Eli could feel the men's stares heavy on his back. He'd marked himself now. He'd stood with the town's outcast. When Miriam's packages were ready, she paused beside him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll repay you somehow." "No need, ma'am," Eli replied, touching the brim of his hat. For a moment, she searched his face as though expecting the hidden price that often followed kindness. Finding none, she left with her head held high. Eli watched her through the window as she walked down the street, small frame burdened by parcels and heavier still by the town's judgment. "You've made a mistake," Morrison muttered. "That woman's nothing but trouble." Eli picked up his barley. "Seems to me, a woman trying to feed her child isn't the one making trouble." Outside, the sun was beginning its slow drop toward the horizon. Eli mounted his horse, ready to head north. But his eyes followed Miriam Harper's figure until she disappeared into the poorer part of town. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he'd only come for grain. But as he rode out of Dry Creek, her fire, her pride, and her silent struggle stayed with him. He'd crossed a line that day, though he didn't yet understand just how much it would change his life. And 3 days later, when Eli Rollins found himself turning back toward that widow's broken farmhouse with a small sack of seed corn in his saddlebag, he stopped pretending. Something had shifted, something he couldn't ride away from anymore. 3 days later, Eli Rollins rode back toward the eastern edge of Dry Creek with more than barley in his saddlebags. He told himself he was only carrying extra seed that would otherwise go to waste. But when the Harper place came into view, sagging under neglect and loneliness, he knew he'd been lying to himself. The house leaned tiredly, its roof patched with whatever scraps Miriam could find, the porch bowed, the fence half fallen. What had once been a garden was now nothing but cracked earth. A little girl, no more than 6, stood in the yard. She had her mother's dark hair and the same solemn eyes. She didn't smile or wave, just watched him with a wariness no child should have. Eli touched his hat to her, then tied his horse at the fence. Before he could knock, the front door creaked open. Miriam Harper stood there with a kitchen knife in hand. She looked ready to fight a battle she'd already fought too many times. Her face softened slightly when she recognized him, but her grip on the knife stayed firm. "Mr. Rollins." She said Eli. He answered. "Brought some seed. Thought it might help." Her eyes narrowed. Thought maybe the poor widow could use charity. Thought maybe someone trying to keep a garden alive in a drought could use seed. "Sitting useless in my barn," he replied evenly. They stood facing each other, neither giving ground until Miriam finally lowered the knife with a sigh. "I suppose you'd better come in." Inside was sparse but clean. 3 mismatched chairs, a wood stove, and shelves holding little more than the supplies Eli had seen her buy. Everything spoke of poverty held back by dignity. "Sarah," Miriam called, and the little girl entered, curtsied politely, and stood close to her mother's skirts. "Would you like some water, Mr. Rollins?" Miriam asked, though Eli could hear what it cost her to offer. "I'm fine," he said gently. "I only came to drop off seed and share a few tricks about planting it right in this soil." She studied him, suspicion and weariness written plain on her face. Finally, she nodded. "Show me then." For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side in the yard. Eli taught her how to plant deep, how to shape the soil to trap what little rain might come, how to water at dawn and dusk to save against evaporation. Sarah followed them, carrying seeds in her small apron. She hardly spoke, but her wide eyes never left Eli. When the sun grew low, Eli called a halt. He noticed the way Miriam swayed, exhaustion pulling at her, though she never once complained. He saw how hunger had hollowed her cheeks, how her pride kept her silent. "That's enough for today," he said. "Seeds need to settle before the next watering." Miriam wiped her brow with a dirty sleeve. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. Just neighbors helping neighbors." She laughed bitterly. "Neighbors? You're the only man in town willing to be seen here." Eli didn't answer. He just gathered his tools and headed for his horse. As he swung into the saddle, Sarah stepped forward. Her small face was solemn. "Mr. Cowboy," she asked. "Yes, miss." "Are you a good man or a bad man?" "Sarah!" Miriam's voice was sharp with embarrassment, but Eli only looked at the girl. "I try to be good." He said honestly, "Don't always succeed." "Why do you ask?" The child's voice was quiet, but steady. "Mama says good men don't hurt little girls, but the men in town say bad things to Mama." And they're supposed to be good men. Eli felt the words strike him deep. He slid down from the saddle, knelt in the dust so he could meet her eyes. "Sometimes folks get confused about what's good and what's bad," he said. "They listen to gossip instead of the truth. Your mama's a good woman, Sarah. Don't let anyone tell you different." Sarah nodded solemnly, then threw her thin arms around his neck. The hug was quick, but it stayed with him as he rode away into the coming dusk. That night, storm clouds rolled over the desert. Rain hammered Eli's ranch, lightning cracking the sky. He tried to sleep, but each crash of thunder dragged him back to thoughts of Miriam and Sarah in that crumbling house. Were they dry? Were they safe? He told himself it wasn't his problem. But when another roar shook the windows, he gave up pretending. Eli saddled his horse and rode out into the storm. The trail was mud, rain blinding, but he pushed through until the Harper house appeared in the lightning's flash. He heard Sarah's terrified crying before he reached the door. Inside, the roof was giving way, water pouring in. The floor already slick with mud. Miriam was trying to catch the leaks with buckets, fighting a battle she couldn't win. "Let me help," Eli shouted over the storm. Miriam spun around, relief flashing in her face before she masked it again. "The roof's going. I can't stop it." "Get what you need," Eli ordered. "We're moving to the barn." She didn't argue. Grabbing what dry provisions she could, she shoved clothes into a sack. Eli scooped Sarah into his arms, the child clinging to him, her sobs breaking his heart. The three of them stumbled through the rain to the barn, barely making it before another section of the roof collapsed behind them. Inside was dark but dry. Eli moved hay bales to block the wind, built a small fire in an old bucket, and spread blankets. He wrapped his own coat around Miriam and Sarah. "You'll freeze." Miriam protested, "I'll manage." "That child won't." They sat huddled together while the storm raged. Sarah's cries quieted, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Miriam held her daughter close, her own hands trembling. "It's gone, isn't it?" she whispered the house. "Roof's half down," Eli admitted, "but walls are standing. Can be rebuilt." With what she said bitterly, "I spent my last coin on flour. We have nothing left." "We'll figure something out," Eli said. "There's no—" "We, Mr. Rollins," Miriam answered quietly. "This isn't your fight." "Maybe not," Eli said, his voice low and firm, "but I'm making it mine." Her eyes filled, though she tried to hold steady while she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the firelight flickered across Eli's face as he finally spoke. "Because some things are worth fighting for. And I reckon you and that little girl are two of them." Dawn broke clear after the storm. But the Harper house stood broken, half its roof gone, water running down warped walls. Eli walked the yard in the early light, mud sucking at his boots, and knew the place couldn't last another storm. When he returned to the barn, Miriam was awake. Sarah still curled against her. She looked at him with eyes that were red from sleeplessness, but her chin was high. "You've done enough," she said quietly. "Go back to your ranch before this ruins you." Eli shook his head. "I'll be back tomorrow with lumber and tools. We'll start fresh." "Mr. Rollins," she began, but he cut her off. Eli. He corrected, "And I don't walk away from people I've chosen to stand with." The next morning, true to his word, Eli arrived with a wagon full of boards, nails, and tools. Together they tore down what couldn't be saved and built a new frame. Miriam worked beside him with stubborn determination, her hands blistering but steady. Sarah fetched nails and carried water, proud of every small task. By evening, the new frame stood against the setting sun. They sat together on the porch steps, weary but alive, sharing beans and bread. Sarah leaned against Eli, half asleep. Miriam's eyes softened as she watched them, though she quickly looked away when he met her gaze. Days turned into weeks. The house took shape again. Each nail driven, each shingle laid seemed to bind them closer. Eli felt it in the way Miriam sometimes smiled without meaning to, in the way Sarah laughed louder when he was near. The town, though, saw it differently. One hot afternoon, 3 riders appeared: Sheriff Watson, Tom Garrett, and Pike Stevens. They reined up at the gate, faces dark with judgment. Rollins, the sheriff, called folks are talking. A single man spending his days at a widow's place ain't proper. Eli rested his hand on his hammer, close enough to his Colt. Seems to me fixing a roof is proper work. Garrett spat tobacco. She poisoned her husband. Everyone knows it. Miriam stepped forward then, her dress patched but her posture proud. Everyone knows lies, she said sharply, and no one lifted a finger when this storm left my child with a leaking roof. Mr. Rollins did. If that shames you, then it's your shame, not ours. The men shifted uncomfortably, but Garrett sneered. You'll drag him down with you, widow. Enough, Eli said coldly. If you've come to work, pick up a hammer. If not, ride on. They left with muttered threats, but the warning was clear. Trouble would come. It came weeks later in the form of 5 men, half drunk and spoiling for a fight. They caught Eli in town, shouting about the witch widow and Rollins playing husband where he shouldn't. The first punch split his lip. The second doubled him over. But Eli was no stranger to brawls. He fought back hard, putting 2 men down before the sheriff's shotgun blast broke it up. You've chosen your side. Garrett spat as they hauled him away. This won't end well. Bruised and bleeding, Eli rode straight to the Harper house. Miriam met him at the porch, her face pale at the sight of his wounds. This is what I feared, she whispered as she stitched his cut with trembling hands. You're paying for standing with us. I told you before, Eli said, his voice steady despite the pain. This is my fight now. Her hands paused. Why, Eli? Why risk everything? He caught her gaze, holding it. Because I won't stand by while you and Sarah are left alone. Because when I look at you, I see more than trouble. I see a woman worth every risk. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I don't want to hope. She whispered hope anyway. He said gently. From that day, Eli was at the Harper place more often than his own ranch. He brought food, fixed fences, taught Sarah to ride a pony. In the evenings, he sat on the porch with Miriam, the silence between them turning softer, safer, but danger still loomed. One night, voices shouted outside, rocks crashing through the windows. Sarah woke screaming as men on horseback jeered from the road. Eli grabbed his rifle and fired 2 shots into the air. The riders scattered into the dark, but the message was plain. They would not be left in peace. The next morning, Eli made his choice. Pack what you can carry, he told Miriam. You're coming to my ranch. It's safer ground. Miriam hesitated, torn between pride and fear. But Sarah clutched Eli's arm, her small voice breaking through. Please, Mama. I want to live where the bad men can't find us. And so, with little more than patched clothes and worn dishes, they left the broken house behind. Eli's ranch was stronger, larger, built with years of hard work. Miriam stood on the porch that first night, Sarah asleep inside, the stars wide above them. She turned to Eli, her voice unsteady. What are we doing, Eli? He took her hand, rough palm against delicate fingers, building something new. He said simply, if you'll let me. Quote, her eyes shimmered in the starlight, fear and longing battling within. Then, slowly, she nodded. From that moment, the path of Eli Rollins changed forever. He had come to Dry Creek for barley. Instead, he had found a widow and her child, and with them, the family he hadn't known he was searching for. And together, come gossip, storms, or guns, they would fight for the life they had begun to build.